Executives, aerospace and defense executives in LA, when the
Test.
Roundtable, which is led by Peter Drucker.
And here we go. Hey everybody, welcome to the panel. We're going to get started. I'm Lee Schneider, Editor-in-Chief at Red Cup Agency. We have a stellar panel today to talk about food. They're all disruptors, they're all creators, they're going to amaze you. I'm going to run this a little bit differently than most panels. I'm going to ask a question to get everybody started. They're going to riff a little bit on that question. Then I'm going to kind of open it up and ask a lot of different questions. And if there are questions from the audience, you guys should go for it. I'm going to try to split this between food, startups, innovation, technology, social engineering. So it's kind of a big list, but I think we can do it. So you're all here because you're change makers, and I'm going to start with a question for each. Sampo, every table. Healthy food is a human right. Now that's right up there on your website. Describe what you're working for and who you intend to reach with what you're doing.
Yeah, so Every Table is a healthy grab-and-go restaurant concept that makes healthy food affordable for everybody. So we open grab-and-go restaurants in both underserved and affluent neighborhoods. In the underserved neighborhoods, we sell the meals for between $5 and $6, and in more affluent neighborhoods, the same meals for $7 to $8. And, for us, we're trying to reach everybody. We think that the fact that a salad costs $15 in Santa Monica is sort of crazy, and that even in Santa Monica, there's a lot of people that can't afford it. And in Compton, there's no salads, period. So, we try to make the food available for everybody. But the truth is that, our mission is really about pushing against structural inequality and creating a more just world for everybody. So at the end of the day, I would say like our ultimate customer, is the folks in, South LA and Watts and Compton who, is really what this company was designed around.
So the key word there is access. We'll come back to that. The next person is Ren Ostry of Trash Fish. Now, you're doing these weekly sustainable seafood meal kits. Customers subscribe every 2 weeks. They can pick up a location or home delivery. So this is social engineering. You have to change people's opinion about fish. Why start there?
So, we're called trash fish, which is an old school industry term that we define as seafood with no consumer market. Because right now, almost 80% of the American seafood diet is made up of just 3 types of fish: shrimp, salmon, and tuna. So think poke bowls and California rolls. And in starting this company, we are trying to address one main problem, which is that there is literally no consumer market for any other abundant, sustainable, healthy, local, fresh seafood that our fishermen are catching. So that's kind of where it all started. We, more than anything, want to make people excited to expand their seafood palates, and so we come in as your personal fishmonger to teach you how to do it. So each week our members get fresh local seafood, an LA-made pantry item, and a recipe, either delivered to their house in Los Angeles or at one of our pickup locations, which are primarily farmers markets. We're at Google and a few WeWork locations.
So this is going to come around to money. I hope everyone's listening. I said money. Good. I saw everyone look up. We're going to get into money in a minute because you're going to see an interesting thing develop here about how each one of these people is approaching this differently. And of course it comes down to money, funding, getting it done. So let's move to the next person, Dinakar Kompala. You're an expert in high-density cell culture and bioprocess engineering. So to distill that down to something that I can understand easily, you might be able to tell us about the future of lab-created meat and other lab-created proteins, yes?
Yeah, we are a technology company, biotechnology, biopharmaceutical technology. Lab-grown sometimes has a negative connotation. It's not, fresh off the field. But what we try to make are valuable therapeutics, proteins that you inject into the body. And because of money, the other point that you mentioned, we can make a lot of different proteins, and we make them a lot cheaper than the next people because we have a very new proprietary patented device which intensifies the process of producing proteins and so on. insulin, antibody, we can make them, but they are much more expensive to bring to market in terms of clinical trials. So we make a protein that I actually consume. It's a protein that we call brazine, which is 2,000 times sweeter than sugar, and therefore no calories. I put it in my coffee, you can put it in your candy, or you can put it into your colas, and we are now trying to tell the world that it is available easily, cheaply.
So this completely different approach, right? I'm going to try to wrap all this together and make sense of it in a minute. Now, Rohit, CEO of the LARTA Institute, and you've developed, the LARTA Institute has developed thousands, 4,000, I think you were saying, innovations that are commercially successful social good enterprises. So you're on the development side of things. Now, when you talk about food, since we're talking about food here, what types of innovations do you think will do the most good? Improving efficiencies in farming, which you've done a few like that, or just better farming chemicals, or where do you think the best place to focus would be?
So thank you so much. Let me just frame, first of all, what we do. LARTA Institute is a 25-year-old company based in LA with very strong roots here going back to a now forgettable time in our history, the dot-com boom, but has gone well beyond that now to become a center, a hub for science-based innovations across the country in 3 areas: feed, and that's around food and agriculture; fuel, around clean tech and energy; and heal, around life sciences and healthcare. In the food space, we actually operate one of the country's foremost confluences or congresses called the Food and Ag Innovation Showcase, which is held once a year in St. Louis. We're likely to move that to other parts of the country, and we curate a number of innovations from around the world towards specific problems faced in our food supply. Specifically, the last panel spoke about soil. Soil health is probably the worst problem we have right now impacting our food supply. And so anything we can do to increase the nutritive power of plants based on soil is going to be extremely important. A reduction in chemicals, an increase in natural occurring enzymes and microbes in the soil, that's an incredibly important thing. Alternative protein, so for example, waste that is conventional in conventional agriculture. Wood, for example, that's a byproduct of so many different processes. Using wood through an enzymatic process to develop an extraordinary protein that has incredible richness for a whole range of purposes, including animal feed. Just two examples here, Lee. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, great. So let's get to the money question. This is my way of framing what everyone's doing here. You hear there's different approaches, right? Ren, I wanted to start with you. I'm not asking where the money comes from. I'm asking the likelihood of investors getting interested in what you do. Now, I can tell you right off the bat that investors are interested in technologies. It's harder to sell investors on social engineering. It's a bit more abstract. But what do you think?
So I've definitely approached the start of this business, and I should add by saying Trashfish is just 1 year old, so we're very new to this world.
Great.
Happy birthday to us.
Wonderful.
I definitely believe that one of the key successes of a small business needs to be that you are offering an easy way to replace habits that people already have. So our target market isn't necessarily someone that's, vegan, but now they heard there is a sustainable way to eat seafood through us, so they want to try it, and that's definitely part of the people we attract. But we're looking at people that are already eating salmon, cooking it at home once a week, and showing them a simple way to replace that habit with something else. So my background is actually in community organizing and social movement building, and my introduction into the food world was actually working with farmers, so going to farmers markets and offering them child service so that we could bring farmers out to protests and protect our land from the fossil fuel industry years ago, working in New York State particular to get a ban on fracking. And the reason I bring that up is that it kind of demonstrated that if we can kind of see a problem and come at it from like a perspective of we're offering a solution to it. It's amazing how many people want to hop on. So we're asking, why aren't people doing what everyone knows we need to do? Because nobody's started it, nobody's made that option available. So when we offer people to do that, it's been amazing the response we've gotten, both in people signing up for the service and coming on to support the growth of the business.
Interesting. So, Sam, access and community, again, a theme. Everyone needs money to make the wheels turn, but in some ways, can you leapfrog over that because you're working so in an entwined way in communities? Or are you thinking a lot about where's my funding coming from?
Yeah, I mean, I think about where our funding is coming from every day. We've raised about $11.5 million from a variety of types of investors, from angel investors to venture capital firms to former private equity people to impact investing venture capital firms, and then more recently from foundations. And, every table sort of falls in this sweet spot when it comes to financing where the opportunity from a financial perspective is enormous in terms of, everybody knows that if you can figure out how to make healthy food delicious and also sell it for $5 or $6, basically the same price as McDonald's, that's, the food market is, one of the biggest markets in the world. I mean, billion, if not, $100 billion opportunity. And then on the flip side of that, from a social perspective, people have this instinctual reaction, and I do too, that, how crazy it is that healthy food has become a luxury product for only the most affluent. And, how could we have let this happen where, food is as elemental as water and air and shelter, and yet, for whatever reason, food is a luxury product. So, there's a lot of foundations and, people who care about social mission stuff that say, if you can figure out how to do this, that's going to change the world for the better. Whether or not, we don't really care about the economics of it, we care about it from a human rights level.
Right, very potent thing that gets people into it, exactly. Dinakar, proteins. Let's focus toward proteins. A lot of what's happening, we just heard, if you attended the last panel here, it was about plant-based diets. And there's a lot of pivot point happening in proteins, artificial proteins, the cost of making proteins, the cost of eating meat. Do you think that whole argument falls on investors' ears and they raise their hands, Bill Gates, for example, and say, yeah, protein, we need to fix that, or we need to work on that? And is that something that you're interested in developing more?
I was sitting on the audience when the panel just a few hours before talked about lab-grown meat. And that is now an idea that a lot of people are excited by, to avoid violence to animals and lab or big plant-grown or industrial farms. The lab-grown meat, to go back to your first question, is an idea that is technically feasible, but right now it is very expensive, the nutrients that you feed, etc. I was reminded an hour ago of the class that I've been teaching on bioprocess engineering when we scale things up. About in 1940s, it was really expensive to make antibiotics. There was enough, after 2 years of effort at a university, there was enough antibiotic made to treat half a patient. The patient was getting better and better, and they ran out of the penicillin that they produced, and the patient, fourth day, fifth day, died of the gangrene that was infecting. But now, in the 40s, early 40s, U.S. War Production Board came up with a plan saying all these big companies should collaborate and come up with innovative ways of making penicillin. The price of penicillin came down by 10 orders of magnitude over the next 30 years. And it's so cheap that you feed it to cattle and chicken and so on, in addition to, of course, treating infections for people. So I think in about 30 years maybe, and the people who are at the previous panel would be shocked, but they were thinking a decade or 3 years. It is a lot of work to bring the cost down. It takes a lot of effort and time to bring it down. So it's possible. Proteins, which I work on, is a little bit easier, and both the lab-grown meat as well as the lab-produced proteins have headwinds in the form of the consumer acceptance of genetically modified organisms. If you do anything in the lab, obviously you are not getting it off the plant or from an animal. You are definitely taking a gene out from somewhere and putting it into a friendly, generally regarded as safe yeast cells is what we choose, a bacteria or some microbes, and then we intensify that production process, and we need to do that to bring the cost of production down. So back to your question, I think lab-produced protein and lab-produced meat are going to be the way of the future. It will we'll have to educate the consumers about, nowadays people consume GMO corn, GMO tofu without hesitating too much. Some people, but many people do hesitate. So there are issues, both consumer education as well as bringing the cost down, and it will be feasible in a few decades.
Interesting. Rohit, do you think if a company came to you with some of these concepts, would you say, go for it, or wait, we need to talk?
So, interestingly enough, Dinakar is an example of a company that we've worked with. We work with companies who receive a specific kind of what you might call a genius grant. Okay, these are SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research grants that are given by every single science-based agency in the federal government. We work with NIH, the National Institutes of Health, with the US Department of Agriculture, with the Department of Energy, with the National Science Foundation, of whom Dinakar received his grant from and then went through us. And then we help them commercialize their products. And so obviously we're incredibly in touch with venture capital, other forms of capital, as a next phase of capital, because these grants are rather large. They can go up to $1 million, $1.5 million. And at an early stage, that's extremely important to validate, test, and scale what you have up to a certain point, right? In the food space, I will say, just to catch up on what you were saying earlier, yes, indeed, there is a tremendous amount of interest. One problem I see is that, VCs will respond to this in particular, and foundations are also looking. Gates, for example, is looking at this issue. Sustainability is a concept whose time has come and may have also gone. And the reason is people don't quite get their heads around what that means. It means a whole bunch of things to different people. The same with organic, right? So if you can consider in the last year, the outbreaks of different sorts of disease functions and pathogens have been among so-called organic produce. And it's partly because of the lack of standardization. So if a company comes to us, the first question is, who is this for? Why would they care? How much would they pay for this? Who else is doing this? And what kind of problem are you really trying to resolve? Is it something that you're orienting towards your own lifestyle? Is it a really felt problem in the marketplace? How do you react and respond to those kinds of questions before you can even start to understand what your real niche or angle or approach to the market might be? And then we can help them address the challenges that they may face through an extraordinary network of people we've developed over 25 years, both on the investment side, but also on the industry side, right? People who are actually using this, who buy this, who are consumers of it. So that's the sort of broader scale that we're looking at.
Always a problem to be solved, right? The question really is how, and I want to, go ahead, Ren, yeah.
I just wanted to say that I completely agree about sustainability sort of having potentially come and gone. And even in the last year, we at Trash Fish have really moved away from that being our buzzword to traceable.
Yep. Very good point.
And people care more about where something is coming from. And then to the point of, the difficulty a lot of these, we as innovators and disruptors face in whether it's getting funding or getting our products or our ideas out to market is we need to demonstrate, as you said, that not only is it something that we're replacing that somebody already needs, but there's this brand awareness. There's making it fun and accessible. Like part of the name Trash Fish is we want to appeal to millennials make it super awesome to eat snails and anchovies, and that, you know, that has to come with the right marketing and branding and you know, making it cool, like, to, you know, your point of, you know, something like the Impossible Burger, like owning the fact that they are GMO and not shying away from these facts.
Can I just jump in there?
Sure, yeah.
Because Ren, you've just brought up a set of issues that I think is actually the dominant paradigm that we're facing right now. Forget about the fact that consumers are fickle and that trends come and go. The fact of the matter is consumers as a whole are demanding what are very real issues that we face. Transparency. Where does my food come from? Where is it grown? How is it grown? Traceability, how is it produced? How is it processed? How is it brought to market? Who touched it? If you think about Driscoll right now, Driscoll is the largest high-value fruit producer in California, and they're certainly one of the highest in the country, in the world. If you look at Driscoll is now pioneering a new way of being able to look at a basket of strawberries. You can look in the back at the QR code, find out exactly where it was grown, which farmer, which picker, which store it went to along the way. That is actually extremely useful information, even when you're tracking it back to an epidemic or a disease, function, or pathogen, or whatever. So transparency, traceability, and of course the opportunity here to really increase the nutritive power of plants. We haven't done that. We've got a lot of abundance in 4 major grains around the world, and we have essentially destroyed the ability to establish a diverse farming pool across the world.
Well, transparency, interesting question, because a lot of the way food comes to us is a black box. What you're doing, local people, local farmers, Sam, I'm pointing to, I get that. But say if it's lab produced, or if there's a lot of technology being injected into this, I know nothing about that. That's not anything that I can scan. And do you think that's important to people?
Where the food comes from. I think we need to give truth in advertising. This is not derived from a plant. This is made from a gene that was put into a friendly food grade host, and we have purified it to such an extent that there is really nothing else there but the protein that we claim there is. People are worried about, for example, foreign genes. We prove that we remove all the DNA or all the genetic material from there, and in fact it is so pure that if you inject it into your body, you will not get any reaction to it because it is a harmless protein. And so it is important. I mean, I come from the industry where most of the proteins are injected into the body for therapeutic purposes, whereas it's a pleasure to work with this protein that I actually consume every day in my morning coffee. It is necessary for if the consumer has to pay some money for the product, he or she has every right to know, if they are so interested, to find out where it came from and how safe. I mean, that is an FDA's job, but we need to make sure that it is a completely safe, completely satisfying and I'm the guinea pig of it, and so on. It is important.
It involves doing something which not a lot of people do, which is reading a label. A lot of people aren't that, they're curious, they want to know, but Sam, I wanted to throw this to you, like, how, there's no label, but there is a zeitgeist. There's a way that you're delivering this to people. How much of that, meaning, you know, I know the farmer, or I know where this is coming from, how much of that is a conversation when you're distributing the food?
Yeah, so our supply chain is really important, and we focus on local farms and local produce. And you know, sometimes I think that every table holds a really important place in the conversation about organic and sustainable and traceable, which is to say that, you know, in a lot of ways that is a sort of like privileged position that I both, you know, agree with very much. And, you know, when we're talking about, you know, can you make a kale chicken Caesar salad and sell it for $5.50 in Compton, for us, you know, where the food comes from is really important, and also the price is really important, and it is really, really important. And, you know, one of the things that we find is that, you know, in the more affluent communities, there is this deep competition amongst brands selling food, and so there are all these like micro differentiators, you know, sustainable, organic, you know, where is it coming from, local, is there farms on the wall, And in Compton, there's no competition. And so, our job in some sense is easier because we're talking about, whole food ingredients that are inspired by the community, that come from local farms. And really, we're the only sort of game in town offering those options.
And can I just say, Sam, this is really inspirational what you do, especially in food deserts. I have to say, one of the problems we have in our food supply is because of the abundance we've created and the destruction of soil health, what has been missing in our food are micronutrients, right? And so this particularly affects the poor. And if you're going to be establishing a regime where you're going to quell hunger and increase health, you need to be very conscious of micronutrients, which is why I think all of us need to, be more engaged with farmers and farms and food than we have been. It's not enough to be able to say, as the children in Rhode Island believe, that meat grows on trees, which is unfortunate. It's an education fallacy in this country that we have not essentially established a closer connection to food. So, I really think that is the key to understanding how we might be able to distribute healthy and good food moving forward.
Yeah.
The other side of that coin on the nutritional value of food is sugar has become so cheap. Among the cheapest things you can buy is sweetened cola or anything as sweetened candy, and it surely lacks all the micronutrients, and it causes obesity and diabetes and other problems. So we need to definitely educate the consumer and have more. Sweetness is something that we are all addicted to. It doesn't have to be caloric. It could be something else. A protein can provide potentially micronutrients as well. If we don't purify the heck out of it, we can put in zinc, manganese, or some of the selenium, whatever micronutrients we have. So there are a variety of technology solutions that are needed for this problem.
Educate the consumer. I want to pick up on that. How? It's a great idea, but do you do it by example, by just showing up? Do you try to go for a cool factor and make it interesting to younger people? Ad campaigns and things like that have been tried, and they're just ad campaigns. So any thoughts about how we would do it?
Well, I think that there's a reason that people buying salads for lunch from every table are doing it from every table and not a local farmer, and people are buying seafood from me and trash fish and not the local fisherman. And on the other side of the QR code and the hyper importance of traceability is not just building a brand, but building credibility. And I think with this push of people really wanting to know everything there is to know about their food, at the same time, parallel to that is this movement of trusting the professional in a way. My friends have butchers that they know by name, which is so cool and very new. And so it's, don't just get to know your farmer, but, get to know your local healthy food provider and your fishmonger and your pharmacist. And so I think that's a big piece of it too. And then, in terms of making it fun and trendy and young, people don't just like weird in LA. We talk about our celebrities being chefs and these people that show us what's trendy to eat, and whatever they say we'll do. Like the example of snails again I keep coming back to, of like these bycatch. So not just sugar that's cheap, but also like the seafood that we land locally that's cheapest, we're exporting to use as bait for other fisheries throughout the world. And then we're eating the Atlantic version of that fish here in LA. So it's an entire system that needs to be fixed, and we shouldn't be putting that on the consumer to fix. We should be putting on the consumer brands and companies to say, take my dollars, I trust you guys to work on fixing that. That's why they're buying from us and not from the farmer and the fisherman.
And the ironic thing is that the consumer brands are now facing headwinds of their own in engaging in what has become the world's largest disinformation campaign on social media, where fact is trumped by imagination, where the notion of poetry as opposed to fact has become standard ways of being able to align to brands. And as a consequence, people just don't know what to believe. And I'll give you a simple example. How many of you here have seen the campaign against GM? I'm not taking sides here in that dispute because that debate has gone. Where they showed on Facebook for years this rat with a human ear on its side to show the evil power of GMO. This is the kind of campaign that got 1.5 million likes in one day and became standard folklore. It's very important that consumers get educated in that sense, and I think it is on the consumer brands. You're absolutely right, Ren, to start to make that work actively. And one example of that, at our most recent Ag Showcase, the keynote was given by a very important person, but somebody that you might be aligning with a company that would otherwise be regarded as evil, right? Dr. Mehmood Khan, the Chief Scientific Officer and Vice Chairman of Pepsi. And he talked about the fact that the pressure they're undergoing right now for on behalf of consumers who are doing this reverse commute across the food chain is extraordinary, because they are known for fat, oil, and sugar, right? And flavored water. And they're trying to now really work actively on soil health, on value chain issues, on how they compress the value chain, the supply chain, as you put it, Sam, from farmers all the way to restaurants, and so on. So I think it's important that we maintain the kind of, focus on good facts and education and science and evidence-based stuff.
Sam, you were going to jump in.
I was just going to say, I think that from this panel, I'm hoping that we get a partnership where we have a Trash Fish Every Table collaboration bowl, and we make some delicious dish, and then we put it
I like that.
Cool. And educate our consumers about sustainable fish.
And I'll come and be your radio voice, yeah.
Excellent.
It's this whole trust the provider idea, which is driving this underneath. Before there were brands, there was just Joe the Butcher or Ren the Fish Market. You didn't need brands because you were just dealing with people. This segs me elegantly, I hope, into this idea of big farm, small farm. This is another aspect of this, that small, local, educating people, or big industrial, increasing supply. That's a big split in this, because industrial farming, let's face it, has depleted the soil. There's a lot of bad stuff that's happened with industrial farming, and yet there's always the argument that we need more food. And that's a kind of a collision course, I think. And if you have people who are helping smaller farmers or local farmers, the argument there is, that's never going to scale. That's not going to solve the problem. That's just going to help one little community. Anyone want to jump in with that?
Economies of scale is just an economic fact. Clearly, centralized manufacturing is going to bring the cost down. On the other hand, nowadays people are worried a lot about distribution of whatever is centrally produced. So it is very conceivable that in different time zones you have different production factories. Or thinking about a global market, many countries are saying we need to produce, let's say, important medicines locally. And so it's all right if you have an IP on it, and we don't want to import it, you have to produce it locally. So it's a mixture of, I think we need to find both solutions, both approaches to addressing this issue.
You look at the global issue, it's a holistic issue, right? Because a lot of your food, whether it's processed or otherwise, comes from very far from where you are, right? But look at the cocoa farmer in Ghana, okay? This is where the bulk of the world's cocoa comes from, is West Africa. In Ghana, these are smallholder farmers, mostly women. This is their livelihood. They depend on the kindness of others, right? As Blanche Dubois said in Streetcar Named Desire. I mean, they depend on a value chain, they depend on a distribution system that will get cocoa to our chocolate bar. Regardless of the chocolate bar you use, even if it's the most sustainable, wonderful, alternative protein chocolate bar, it still has cocoa in it, because that is what we have learned to do. So what do? If they don't have a global value chain, a global distribution chain, they can only grow locally, and there just simply isn't enough demand or purchasing power to enable them to have a living. So you've got this issue going on. And the other issue is, quite frankly, I think consumers are driving, as I know Sam will say and Ren will say too, locally produced food in a major way. It is in fact disrupting the industrial farming model. It is. At the same time, we still need to maintain scale, and as Dinakar said. So there is an opportunity here, I think, to understand both sides of that equation. One is that there is a global food chain that we have to respect and understand and make more transparent and more traceable. And the other side, of course, is understanding that local economics are also extremely important.
Fascinating. So I'm going to get the 5-minute, there it is. I want to do kind of a lightning round and ask each person, does being a change maker mean to you? So Sam.
I don't know what to do with that question.
Answer a different question.
It basically means, making a world that, that we can all aspire to, that is different than what it is right now.
That's good. See, you did okay. Right?
My answer would have been different if you hadn't asked the question you asked just before that, and I want to change it now. So I think being a change maker means not directly answering a question, but instead asking the question asker why they need to ask it in the first place. Like the example of how do you grow? I'd say I don't warehouse product, and I'm really proud of that fact. Why do you need me to grow in that way? So I think it's kind of disrupting the standard model that people want to see you fit into. Yeah.
So I read this proverb somewhere that said, if you want something to change in the world, you be the one who makes the change. And that is what I have taken up very strongly, internalized to be the innovator. I am a diabetic. I am tired of looking at the shelves for the amount of sugar, added sugar, or even native sugar. I'm just tired of trying to fight that battle. I have to go and make this sugar-free protein. So I'm the change maker in that sphere.
So what we want to do at LARDA is to explore the confluence between food and health, and between food and energy, and between health and energy, because the sciences are coming together. But Hippocrates said, let food be thy medicine and let medicine be thy food. To us, it is extremely important that we have that we first of all resolve the nutrition gap that exists. And hopefully there won't be any food deserts anymore. But in addition to that, really understand the basis of our food supply and its basis to the human biome. Most importantly, the gut microbiome. So I think we are focused on those kinds of solutions, on bringing them to the market, on making them available, on having consumers and buyers use them actively, and by doing so, to celebrate the power of the individual small business minds, small businesses like all of us.
Fabulous. Well, it really is transparency and everyone understanding the basis of the food supply. That is a theme that I'm hearing coming through. However it's manifested, however the approach is, it's about connecting to the food supply. So we probably have a couple of minutes if there's any questions out there. Anyone have any fabulous questions? Anything that I forgot that you want to jump in on? Go.
Yes, hi. My name is Monique, and I have a question regarding the quality of the soil as far as when when the produce is saying certified organic. From what I understand, there's less than 1% of certified organic produce in the U.S. And I'm just wondering, because many people say it's not really organic. At some point, you're getting toxins in it no matter what. So how can you speak to that? How can we actually know what's happening when it actually says certified organic?
Yeah, so one big issue that we have is, you've heard the parable of the blind man and the elephant, right? So if you've got 3 blind men and an elephant, and each one chooses a different part of the elephant to describe the entire elephant, right? I mean, and part of the problem is there isn't really a standard way to discuss and disseminate information about organic. That is just a fact, and there's a tussle going on, and has been for some time, between the FDA and USDA on the certification use of that term and how it is best used. So I'm afraid I cannot give you a reasonable answer, because it would just be a disservice to the. I will say this: A lot of indoor agriculture, for example, starting from scratch, using germplasm that is not necessarily conventionally available in the field today, can effectively develop what you might in any context call organic, by essentially growing it in a controlled environment, providing with micronutrients that are not necessarily contaminated with anything that favoring any particular kind of food, organic or otherwise. I'm just telling you how it might be that we could get to a place where organic becomes a reasonably well understood standard.
Good point.
That's the best I can do, sorry.
Well, I think the theme also is know where your food comes from. One more question?
Yes, I'm great. I've been studying everything you've been doing since the beginning. And the real big question, though, for me is, yes, the food deserts, I know about them. I've studied them and done all that in the urban communities. But it's one way, it's almost like they say you can take the horse to the water but not make them drink, can they really drink it? And I find out within the urban communities, they've been so tied to fast foods and stuff, and especially in their money, you only got $5, but I can get them a Big Mac or drink or whatever like that. And I've gone and tasted your food, and I've seen it grow. I've seen when you guys have this certain foods, and I said, oh, that's good, but I don't think a lot of urban people eat that. Then when it started doing more, and I said, okay. But the key that I don't know to this whole puzzle of you doing this is, are you educated? Have you developed something you can educate the food? Are you bringing in people from the community that talks about the importance of your health? We talk about diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, which plagued in that particular environment, and let them know how it really makes a difference. Your kids, how they can go to school and learn better because they got nutritious food, and it's only $5 or $6 or something like that. Versus, yes, it looks good to have taco or whatever from Del Taco, but it's a difference. So are you working towards that, or
Yeah, so thank you for the question. We start with some, sort of pretty basic assumptions, which is that we believe that everybody wants to be healthy, and they, I want to eat healthy food more than I do, honestly, and we also believe that, all cultures have built up over time cuisines that have basically two things in common. One is that they're delicious, and two, that they're healthy. It's just how people have evolved, basically. So we sort of think that this current food system is an aberration that has occurred over the last 50 years. And so what we do is we don't take, a kale and wheatgrass salad and bring it into Compton. We make a Jamaican jerk chicken with coconut beans and rice that is designed to be delicious sort of to everybody. And then as far as education, I started a nonprofit that Every Table grew from a nonprofit that was about sort of education, but the truth is that the numbers don't actually work. And what I mean is for a successful store for us, and by the way, our most successful stores are in underserved communities, we have to do 400 or 500 meals a day, which means that we have to have basically tens of thousands of customers. And so we can't, hold seminars or classes to educate tens of thousands of people at every store. So what we did is we just tried to design a menu and an experience that was so good, and not only for sort of health nuts or whatever, but just so good to everybody, making real food, community-inspired food. So for example, I don't know if you saw that we have this Trap Kitchen collaboration bowl. So Trap Kitchen are these Compton guys that started this incredible Instagram business. So we're making a Trap Kitchen chicken curry bowl that's coming out on November 5th. It is so good from these guys, but it's healthy, basically. So it's really can you make real food? And then, at the end of the day, it's true that a milkshake and a burger and fries is probably going to taste better, but also I think people know that that's just not good for you. And one last thing is that, here's what our other belief is, and we know this to be true, is that people believe that folks in fast foods eat so much fast food, but actually the numbers are pretty similar in terms of the percentage of people in underserved, middle class, and affluent communities that eat fast food. The difference is that in underserved communities, there's no other restaurants, there's no other Sweet Green. So we feel like we're bringing in this new sort of type of food, but we're not just trying to convince all the people that are eating McDonald's every day. We're sort of going into the most dense areas of the city with a really affordable product and saying, we've got something that nobody else does that, we think that you're going to like. And
Sam, I can tell you right now, I've got 3 ladies here. You can just put your hands up, guys, from Lauda. We would love to be able to come and educate and help to educate the community as well. It's something that we would love to be able to do, because I think one of the things you might tell anyone that you're working with, the most important thing right now to understand is the human gut microbiome. Because it affects cardiovascular health, it affects brain health, it affects the entire body, and that comes from food. Food is an incredibly important part of that gut microbiome. So we would love to be able to do that, Sam. Okay?
So I think that's very important, even starting with school age kids.
Yep.
If you start there, then they'll automatically do it because they grew up with doing it. How about cooking at home, encouraging people to just cook at home?
We could, but
Yep.
I think we're going to get the Academy Award music. And they're going to ring us off, but we can talk after, I think. So thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
People.